Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy, but America's agricultural landscape is not easy to navigate. Between different companies, scientific advancement, government regulations, advertisement campaigns, and an unhealthy amount of myth and misconception, anyone would be hard-pressed to make sense of it. That's where Real Ag comes in. Kyle Bauer and the Real Ag crew bring you truthful, unbiased information about real agricultural concerns. From the producers who make your food, to the store where you buy the final product, and everything in between. This is Real Ag. Now, here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Today, we're talking about a crop that takes 10 years to bear fruit, but continues to produce for hundreds of years. Pecan farming is our topic today on Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
Servitech has been helping producers across the Midwest make the planet more productive since 1975. We are proud sponsors of Real Ag, helping tell the story of how your food makes it to your plate.
The Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
What sort of plant do pecans come from?
Pecan is in the hickory family. It is the largest tree of all the hickories.
People are probably surprised, but the native pecan that we have actually has a much broader range than a lot of people think. A lot of people think it would not grow in northern Kansas, for example, but it does actually. The majority of pecans are located down in the southeast portion of the state, and especially in terms of production, and that primarily relates to the type of soils that we have down there and our climate.
Pecans are very finicky when it comes to soils and soil types. They do best in floodplains where the soils are extremely deep, fertile, and there's plenty of access to water. Pecan is a water-loving tree.
I think Georgia, for example, leads pecan production, probably followed by Texas and then maybe Oklahoma. So a lot of the heaviest production we'll see with pecan in the United States occurs in kind of the southern and eastern part of the United States.
When we get heavy rains, which we do every spring, we'll get serious floods in this area. And I've been down here in hip waders, in john boats, all kinds of things down here in the river bottom looking at pecans underwater. Although pecans are native to that system, they can withstand flooding. Of course, they cannot withstand flooding for extended periods, and by that I mean more than 3 weeks. Wet years actually depress nut production the following year worse than dry years do, because the trees can't breathe and the roots can't breathe if the soil's saturated all the time. There's a lot of things that affect nut production in pecans. Partly it's water supply the previous year, how much nutrients they're getting in terms of fertilizer. All of our groves in this area are all fertilized annually, twice a year. We fertilize both fall and spring. And that kind of evens out the ups and downs because you get good healthy trees with fertilization.
Pecans go through a life cycle just like every other plant.
In the winter seasons, usually November, December, we get in a bunch of pecan seeds and we have to go about stratifying them before they're gonna grow at all. Stratified means giving them a cold treatment or some sort of treatment that will help them break out of their hard shell. And what we do is give them kind of an acid treatment to help break down that shell. They also go about it naturally in nature throughout a winter, going through a very cold season, meeting certain temperatures. Most people think it takes a long time to start bearing on a pecan tree. It takes roughly 7 to 10 years if it's a grafted tree. When a farmer gets pecan seedlings from us, he'll want to go ahead and plant them in an area where he can water them. We recommend to avoid any more transplant shock down the road that they plant where it's desired, and either have a tractor drive out with water, or set it up to drip tape is often what most farmers use with us. And they'll be watering them every 7 to 10 days for the next 3 years, or until the roots are established and it can handle a summer heat on its own.
We fertilize our pecans twice a year. And in the spring of the year, we're applying nitrogen and potassium. Most of these trees, what's interesting, it's different than crops, because we don't disturb the soil in a pecan orchard. All of our trees have a mycorrhizal association. And mycorrhiza are a fungi that attach to the root, and the fungi gets carbohydrates from the tree in exchange for the fungi exploring the soil and taking up phosphorus and water to the tree. Beneficial long-term relationship. And certain times of the year you can actually see the mushrooms come up under the trees. It's always the same species. It's the mycorrhiza associated with pecans.
From January until July, we're going to be nursing them and watering them. We, for a while, just have them in a really humid greenhouse, and then slowly transition it to fertilizing water every couple days throughout the week.
For a horticultural crop, we have a fairly minimal spray schedule. We spray for an insect called pecan nut case bearer. It's a moth that lays an egg on the nut, and the worm comes out and starts eating one nut, and then it goes to the next nut, and then goes to the next. It can wipe out an entire cluster of nuts. So we try to control that, because it can reduce your crop up to 25%, and that's the first part of June. The biggest problem that people have seen, especially in backyard pecan trees, is an insect called pecan weevil. It's a snout beetle, just like all the other weevils that get on grain or acorns or whatever, that drills through the shuck of the nut in August, through the shell, and then she turns around and deposits 5 to 7 eggs inside the nut. Those eggs hatch, and they devour all the kernel inside the nut. Then they devour each other until one remains the strongest. He'll come out, he'll chew through the shell, and out he'll pop and down into the soil. And you'll be left at harvest with a shell with a small hole in it. You might have seen that, but that's what you'll end up with. The interesting thing about pecan weevils is pecan weevils are so smart, they know that pecan trees have this alternate bearing up and every other year, especially in the wild. It's more accentuated in the wild. And so pecan weevil life cycle is 2 years long. So they've got it figured out. It goes up and down, so do they. The nice thing about pecans is they come in multiple wrappers. There's a green hull over the outside of the pecan, okay? That opens up in the fall of the year and falls off, and then the nut comes out. There's another wrapper, it's called the shell. So we're applying our pesticides during midsummer. We're harvesting in November. Pesticides are all gone, but even if there were any residuals, they'd be on the parts of the plant that you're not eating at all. You don't even come close to. Pecan trees will bear for a very long time. In fact, trees planted by Thomas Jefferson in Monticello are still there. He planted those in the early 1800s. So they're very long-lived trees. The only thing that really hurts a pecan tree in age is lightning. If you get a lightning strike, it can damage the tree a lot. And once you get that damage, then you start getting other things, wood rotting diseases, and come in, and then the tree will start to decline. But in terms of an orchard, it'll last over 100 years. Harvest is fully mechanical. It's one advantage of the pecan industry over many horticultural crops. When you think about apples or peaches, where everything has to be hand-picked and there's a lot of hand labor involved. with pecans, we have a machine that attaches to the trunk of the tree and shakes the entire tree, and that shakes the nuts out of the tree, they fall to the ground. At that point, we have another machine that actually picks the nuts up off the ground. It uses rubber fingers to sweep them up out of the grass and up into the machine. And then we bring it inside to our barn where I'm sitting now, to this cleaning machine behind me. And we have to separate the pecans from any trash that the harvester picks up. Small sticks, any fragments of clay or any other kind of debris. And then, because we can only sell, unlike the grain boys that can sell dirty wheat because they're selling, quote, foreign matter, pecans have to be 100% pecan and nothing else, or they won't buy it. Then it comes the part of marketing. You can either market them directly consumer, that there's quite a few Kansas nut growers that do that. And a lot of those people end up buying their own cold storage because they're planning on taking care of the consumer, which means going to farmers markets all summer, the next summer, and marketing their crop. So they'll have to have cold storage. The guys that are harvesting a lot of pecans and are going for the wholesale market where they're just going to put it on a truck and ship it out, they get on the phone and start trying to get bids for their crop.
There are native pecan trees and grafted pecan trees. What is the difference?
In Kansas, there is an interesting industry in our pecans down in the southeast part of the state.
Most of our production in Kansas, though, is from native trees. The native trees were here before people started messing with them. They just carved the forest out and left the pecan trees, took out all other species of trees, and then you have trees that are already bearing, fairly large, and they're ready to go, so you can get into production much quicker. The downside of natives is they don't bear as much per acre as a grafted orchard. So there's a trade-off back and forth. Grafting is the process where you take a piece of wood or a stick, 1-year-old growth, from a tree of superior nut production. Large nut, thin shell, etc. You take that stick in the dormant season and you keep it in the refrigerator until spring. And then spring, once the growth starts on your little rootstock tree, starts to grow, there's little carving together and you stick them together and it grows from that point where the heel's over and that stick breaks bud, and everything that breaks from that stick is genetically identical to the tree you took it from. So that's how you get one tree, one after the other, of the same cultivar, the same nut.
Which creates a much larger nut, a little bit thinner shelled, and a real tasty nut meat. And so there's a variety. There's, I don't know, 13 to 15 varieties, you know, that they're working on down at that part of the state to improve pecan production. And so those are all grafted onto rootstock when trees are a very young age.
In all trees, you have the wood in the inside, the bark on the outside. And between the two is a layer of cells called the cambium. And what the cambium is it makes new cells. It makes more wood on the inside, it makes more bark on the outside. That's how trees get bigger around. And in all our grafting, what we have to do is get cambium, the only place where you get new cells made, cambium of the signwood piece, or the stick that you've got of your good variety, you got to get that cambium on that right next to cambium on the stock or the rootstock. And when that happens, you get these cells actively divided, and that's when they will grow together. Grafting is an ancient process. It started with the ancient Sumerians back in what is now Iraq. The Sumerians as we all know, familiar with now, a little bit about the topography of Iraq. The southern part of Iraq, as you go south towards Kuwait, you go into the salt swamps. So you get brackish water and you get high salt levels in the soil. As these people tried to grow grapes, because grapes are very important for making wine, and wine's been around forever too. As they tried to grow grapes farther south, they noticed that their vines would die, although there was one vine that could withstand the salt, but it made really poor fruit. So what they did was take that root, split it in half, and took a piece of wood from a good grapevine, make it like a chisel, and just stuck it in between. Then they took, and you had to get this right, because all grafters know you have to get it perfectly right. You have to mix fresh camel dung with mud and put that around the graft union, and what that does is keep in the humidity. And then after that, they'd wrap it with a string to hold that all on. And the graft would take, and the buds from that little stick on top would sprout, and they'd be the good grapes. So grafting's been around forever. In fact, if you look through the history of nut crops, it's interesting. If you go in the late 1800s, there was the great debate whether to plant orchards of seedling trees or orchards of grafted trees. And eventually the grafted people won out because you get a more uniform product, you get larger, a very predictable product. You know it's going to be a certain size, you know it's going to be a certain quality of nut. So that eventually won out.
What are pecans used for?
Pecans have been used for as long as people have been around. They were collected by the Native American tribes. They actually used them and smashed them and fermented them to make a alcoholic beverage. In fact, the word hickory comes from the Indian word for that alcoholic beverage. It's been used forever as a food. There limited amount of oil pressed from nuts because the value of the pecan is so high. It's not worth pressing it for oil. Although pecans have roughly 70 to 75% oil in the kernel. So it's very high kernel. And the quality of the oil is quite good. It makes a good salad oil, but not a good cooking oil. It breaks down in cooking. Besides that, most of the time pecans are used as an ingredient in either ice creams or confectionery type products, or just people buy pecans to eat. They're not frozen in the stores, unfortunately, because they would keep better if they were put in cold storage in the store. But as you know, as a shopper, when you go to the store, all the nuts are on the same aisle, and they're not going to take pecans and put them somewhere else because people couldn't find them or whatever. So what they have to do, a lot of pecans that you see in grocery stores have been cooked. Pecans, when they're processed, have to be sterilized before they're cracked. It's a FDA regulation. And there's several ways legally that shellers can sterilize nuts. Steam, hot water, or cold water with chlorine. Most shellers use hot water because it's the cheapest method. Unfortunately, when you put pecans in hot water, you start the cooking process. And many times they're left in hot water too long and they come out cooked. That's why when you look at pecans in the grocery store, most of them have a fairly dark reddish brown color because they're cooked. They do keep longer once they're cooked, but it changes the flavor dramatically. And there have been times in the past where pecans were sold logging for logs and for wood products. Currently, the market, pecan is sold as hickory. It is thrown in with all the other hickories, although its wood characteristics are slightly different than shagbark hickory or mockernut hickory, it's close enough where they throw it all together. You can see hickory in the marketplace in terms of wood cabinets for kitchen cabinets right today. Pecan makes excellent firewood. It does have some disadvantages as a firewood. It's a great smoking wood. People like it for smoking meats. The disadvantages is pecan is probably the most desirable wood for an insect called wood bees and powder post beetles. 2 insects that attacked recently cut wood, drill into it and just riddle the inside of the wood. So if you're going to harvest pecan for firewood and store it over the summer, it needs to be tarped or it's prevented from insects finding it because they will just reduce it to sawdust.
What are the economics of pecans?
The U.S. is #1 producer in the world, of course. There is some in Mexico, and then there's some in scattered places around the world like South Africa, Australia, things like that. But by far, 95% of all pecans grown in the world are grown in North America. Lately, we've had a huge interest in our pecan crop from China. And for a while, it made prices of pecans go outrageously high. Growers were making money hand over fist. And then the Chinese decided they had enough, and they backed out of the market, and the prices went to nothing, and so that's where we are now. We've gone through one of these huge market upswings, and then we're hitting the bound, and it'll come back and it'll start to even out again in terms of price. But we're all suffering as we go. Of course, we never suffered when we went to the bank with those big checks, but everybody bought a new pickup and everybody was happy. But the price fluctuations are part of farming, whether you're doing pecans or corn or wheat or beef or anything else.
What is the future of pecans?
Pecan has been steadily on the uptick. When we were getting paid $2 a pound for native pecans, which we were about 3 or 4 years ago, all people got out of the woodwork. Still to this day, nurseries are selling out of pecan trees. They're actively being planted, both Kansas, Missouri, and of course across all the South. There's a lot of interest in it. Part of that is fueled by people see a growing demand for pecans. And part of that is pecan is the ultimate in retirement project. Okay, I'll tell you the Reed theory of retirement projects. A man gets to 50 years old. He's raised all his children. He's got nothing better to do but to talk to his wife. And she doesn't want to talk to him. She wants him out of the house. So he decides, I'll start a retirement project. I'll start growing pecan trees. It's a beautiful, very calming experience. So people go out and plant pecan orchards for their retirement program. They get to 65, trees are 15 years old. This is great. They get to 75 and say, oh my God, there's a lot of work involved. Of course, if people are dedicated to the pecan trees and their orchard, I have seen that it extends people's lives dramatically.
That wraps up this episode of Real Ag. Remember, you can see every episode of this series by going to SmokyHillsTV.org. Until next time, I'm Kyle Bauer, and this has been Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible by
Servitech has been helping producers across the Midwest make the planet more productive since 1975. We are proud sponsors of Real Ag, helping tell the story of how your food makes it to your plate.
The Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.